academics had spoken with Mark Gallagher, who was a lobbyist for the Catholic bishops for a long time. And he said the organizational structure of the Catholic Church is an absolute dream. And he described this system where they would tax each Catholic in the diocese a penny, and they were able to raise huge amounts of money to support their anti-abortion efforts. And there's an example of one of the early opponents of the Hyde Amendment, Dan Flood, who was a Democrat from Pennsylvania, basically giving this extremely impassioned speech denouncing the Hyde Amendment, calling it, saying he was anti-abortion himself, one of the many politicians who would say, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but he said a vote for this amendment is not a vote against abortion. It is a vote against poor people. That's what it is, as plain as the nose on your face. And there were other Democrats who picked up this same language. They said, look, regardless of what you might think about abortion, you can't just ban Medicaid funding and leave private funding alone. Like this is clearly, transparently unjust. And then Dan Flood, Mark Gallagher told these academics how he got every single Catholic pastor in his congressional district together to write a letter to Dan Flood, telling him like, hey, you can't do this. And he got the letter and he flipped. And so that was the organizing power of the Catholic Church. The National Right to Life Committee, which was the biggest, most influential anti-abortion group, one of the biggest to this day, but certainly back in the 1970s was the largest.
So one of the things that I found was like so funny about the presentation I went to from Alex, who is the director of the Institute for Research on Male Supremacism, who is hosting this webinar right now with Amy. So Alex, when I was in her presentation at the Socialist Conference, went through this long history of how the right has built up these activist organizations and they funded these far right activist organizations, and they got into, they were specifically focused on extremist messaging in these activist organizations. And she basically talked about like what happened in the 70s and the 80s with the right organizing and all of that, like, decades ago, like 40 years ago. And so I asked Alex, I was like, I raised my hand very bravely because I was pretending to be a socialist at this conference. And I said, but like, I think that the history of what you're talking about is really good and informative, but what is the right doing now? And it was so funny because I was just like, I was trying to like ask it in the most like dumb way I could, like how, like, you're the Institute for Research into Male Supremacism. So can you tell me how the conservative right is organizing now, like today, like what they're doing now? And actually, when I asked that, the students in the room were like, yeah, what are they doing now? And do you know what the answer was? It was something to the effect of, they're just existing off of the organization that they did 40 years ago. Like the director of the Institute for the Research into Male Supremacism could not tell me what the political right is doing now in terms of organizing, because she basically said they created all these organizations 40 years ago and now they're experiencing the benefit of having created those organizations. I was like, so you're saying they aren't doing anything now then? Like, it was so confusing to me because this is literally projection from the left, because the left did all this shit like 50 years ago with the Frankfurt School, and now they've got all these organizations built up and they've taken over all these institutions, and they seem to be completely oblivious to the fact that they've done this, but they're accusing the right of doing it. It makes no sense. Anyway, I thought that was funny since Amy's going on a huge diatribe into like anti-abortion legislation from the 70s. And I kind of wonder if she's going to say the same thing.